Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots Monday Morning, where we watch the Sunday morning news show so that you don't have to. I'm Katie Halper.
I'm Aaron Maté. Good Monday morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. Great to start the week with you and some of the biggest scumbags in the world that will be featured in today's clips from the Sunday morning news shows. There's a lot going on out there. Hope everybody who celebrated Thanksgiving had a good one. Our website is usefulidiotspodcast.com, which you can go to support the show and get bonus content.
Like Thursday Throwdown, which is basically when we do this, but not live, about weekday clips. So you definitely don't want to miss that.
Yeah, it's like this, but it's not live.
Yeah, exactly. It's really fun.
All right. Well, let's get to it. Let's start with our weekly recap from Meet the Depressed.
MTP.
And welcome.
Good Sunday morning. President-elect Trump proving once again he plans to shake up Washington in his second term, announcing plans to nominate Kash Patel as his next FBI director. Patel is a hardline critic of the Bureau who has called for shutting down the agency's Washington headquarters, firing its leaders, and bringing the nation's law enforcement agencies, quote, to heel.
Do you believe that you can deliver the goods on this in a pretty short order the first couple of months so we can get rolling on prosecutions?
Yes, we got the bench for it, Bannon. And one thing we learned in the Trump administration the first go around is we got to put in all America patriots top to bottom.
The move to pick Patel means that Trump's own hand-picked FBI director, Christopher Wray, would need to be fired or resign since his 10-year term doesn't end until 2027. Meanwhile, the president-elect is threatening harsh tariffs against America's top three.
We're going to more on Kash Patel later on in the broadcast. But what I find interesting about all the coverage of Kash Patel is they really don't focus on what I think he's best known for and why he's so loathed by people like the pundits on corporate networks, which is that he exposed Russiagate. He was a House intelligence investigator who first brought to light the fact that the FBI had carried out serious surveillance abuses in carrying out the bogus investigation of Trump as a Russian agent. And he was very instrumental in exposing that. I've actually interviewed him before about this. And he showed that basically the FBI was lying to the FISA court and concealing the fact that it was relying on the Clinton campaign-funded Steele dossier. And that aspect of Kash Patel doesn't get very much attention because, A, he was right, and B, the media and the establishment were wrong. And
killer combo.
Yeah. And so anyway, but that's just one aspect of this pick, which certainly is going to, much as the Matt Gaetz pick for Justice Department was pretty provocative. This one is too, because Kash Patel has been a very harsh critic of the FBI, and he is very loyal to Trump. So there's going to be certainly a meltdown about his nomination as well.
Well, Aaron, having interviewed him, would he get your vote?
Would Kash Patel get my vote for FBI?
Yeah.
Well, I don't endorse candidates.
Right.
I learned my lesson after I advocated for Joe Biden in 2020.
Right.
So, I'm just excited for the confirmation hearings because they're going to be, I think, really entertaining. Yes.
You do. Yes. I believe you made an exception in your endorsement policy for one Dennis Kucinich.
Oh, that is true. Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yes, that's true.
Yeah. Just wanted to keep you on your toes.
Yeah.
Keep him honest. Keep my co-host honest.
Yeah. I did endorse Dennis Kucinich. That's right. That was an exception because Dennis Kucinich was the only person in Washington who was consistently anti-war.
Oh, yeah.
And was still a progressive. Like after all the other progressives who were anti-war were chased out of Washington, Dennis was trying to come back, and he recently ran as an independent in Ohio. And wasn't able to make it, but yes, that was an exception.
Despite his appearance on the Katie Halper Show on Useful Idiots,
I know
we were pulling for him.
I know we failed there.
Next time.
Trading partners, Mexico, Canada, and China. The tariffs may be an opening negotiating position as President-elect Trump looks for leverage to deal with issues of drugs and the border.
It's one of the most beautiful words in the whole world. It's going to make us wealthy again.
The most beautiful word
in the entire dictionary of words is the word tariff. I love tariff. I can make anybody do anything through the use of tariffs.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Wow, this guy really loves tariffs.
Yeah,
The
he's
most,
a crush.
the most beautiful word in the dictionary of words is tariff. I mean, I've never seen Trump get so emotional and
Yeah.
sentimental. But yeah,
I think
he
he's a
loves
tariff sexual.
tariff.
Yeah.
Well, there we
I
go.
think it's fair to say, yeah. And of course, even we didn't cover this clip last week, but even Trump fans like Rand Paul points out how tariffs actually hit the consumer, which is of course something that Trump will not be highlighting.
Yeah, I mean, this is not my forte, but it seems to me if you're like imposing a tax or a tariff, whatever you want to call it, on, say elements that are used to make consumer products in the US, then the price of that is going to get passed on to the consumer. It's not as if companies are going to be like, all right, I guess we'll take the hit just so we
Right.
can get our products to the people. They're going to
Right.
raise the prices. But this is not my forte. So I'll be curious to see how this argument plays out. And
Yeah.
then, of course, to what extent is Trump just, trying to he's trying to do art of the deal stuff. He's trying to make a
Right.
threat to give himself leverage at the bargaining table to get, I don't know, some advantageous concessions for the US. I don't know, but this strikes me as pretty wild. And Justin Trudeau just flew down to Mar-a-Lago to basically beg Trump not to do this.
Right. Well, Claudia Sheinbaum's new president, she didn't clarify, but
Of
she
Mexico,
did
yes.
of Mexico, sorry. Yes. She did say there will be no potential tariff war.
Okay.
So we'll see
Well,
what that means
but that
in the
might
coming
interfere with
months.
Trump's identity as a tariff sexual,
I know.
So we'll
It's tariff phobic.
see.
Trudeau wasted no time traveling to Mar-a-Lago for a dinner on Friday with the president-elect to discuss the matter of Mr. Trump's resort. It comes after Trudeau warned tariffs would hurt consumers in both countries.
Donald Trump, when he makes statements like that, he plans on carrying them out. He would be actually not just harming Canadians who work so well with the United States, he'd actually be raising prices for American citizens as well and hurting American industry and businesses.
Now, already, U.S. CEOs are warning if President-elect Trump does impose new tariffs, they will be passed on to consumers as higher prices. Best Buy CEO saying the vast majority of that tariff will probably be passed on to the consumer. Home Depot's CEO warning there certainly will be an impact. And Walmart's finance chief saying tariffs are going to be inflationary. President Biden also weighing in.
I hope he rethinks it. I think it's a counterproductive thing to do. We're surrounded by the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and two allies, Mexico and Canada. And the last thing we need to do is begin to screw up those relationships.
On Tuesday, President Biden announced a ceasefire deal in Lebanon between Israel and Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed militia the U.S. designates as a terror group. Mr. Biden saying he will renew his push for a ceasefire and hostage deal in Gaza.
Oh, well, this is encouraging. He's going to renew his push for a ceasefire deal in Gaza, the same push that has yielded us a year-long genocide, while Biden has pretended every single week that we're close to a ceasefire.
Aaron, that's not fair. It did result in a pause at one point.
Oh, that's right. Yes. About a year ago, we got a week-long pause. That's right. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Never forget.
Yeah. Well,
that's
maybe
the result of all those hard conversations.
Yes. So maybe Biden can get one more week-long pause to a genocide before he leaves.
Yeah.
And hands it off to Trump.
So pathetic.
And just as the Lebanese people deserve a future of security and prosperity, so do the people of Gaza. They too deserve an end to the fighting and displacement. And so now Hamas has a choice to make. Their only way out is to release the hostages, including American citizens, which they hold.
On Saturday, Hamas
has had a hostage, has offered to release the hostages for over a year. They had a hostage deal on offer for over a year.
I'm also not even sure at this point how many captives Hamas actually controls. You know, it's like this assumption that they're all under Hamas's control, and they're all, it's. I suspect that both sides, including Hamas, are playing that up a little bit for their own end, because it's so awful in Gaza and so like, look what happened to Sinwar. Everyone, the Israeli line was that the leader of Hamas, Sinwar, was like hiding in some fortified bunker, when really actually he was like above ground with a couple of aides, and went on fighting. So this idea that like Hamas is holding everyone and is on track of it, is on top of everything, I just don't really buy that. And there have been many opportunities before to have a ceasefire deal, but Israel kept changing its demands, and Biden covered up for that.
Right. Because they don't want a ceasefire deal for many reasons, including the fact that, well, they want to ethnically cleanse Gaza. They want to start moving in. The settlers want to move in, beachfront property. And of course, Netanyahu will get in trouble as soon as the war is over.
Released a video showing American Idan Alexander, who was taken captive on October 7th.
This video is like he's screaming to everyone, look at me, I'm alive. I'm surviving for 421 days. Please bring me home. I want to come back to my family.
And joining me now is National Security Advisor.
So I wanted to read some of what that video, the Idan Alexander video, says, because they just showed his mother, but they don't show the actual video. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he does say, to Prime Minister Netanyahu, I heard you speak to the people of Israel on the news, and I'm very disappointed. I heard that you will give $5 million to whoever brings us back alive. The Prime Minister is supposed to protect his citizens and soldiers, and you neglected us. Our guards told us about the new instructions in case the army forces reach us. The fear is at its peak, and we are dying 1,000 times every day that passes, and no one feels for us. The people of Israel do not neglect us. We want to return home with a full mind. Fear and isolation are killing us. Please do not forget us. It is unreasonable that we pay the price for a mistake made by the government. And it is time to put an end to this nightmare. And then he also addresses Trump and says, as an American, I've always believed in the power of the U.S., and now I'm sending my message. Please use your influence and full power of the U.S. to negotiate for our freedom. Please do not make the mistake Biden has been doing. The weapons he has sent are now killing us, and the unlawful sieges are now starving us. I don't want to end up dead like my fellow U.S. citizen Hirsch, my mother, my father, my grandfather, my grandmother. Every day that passes, pain increases inside me. Every day I pray to see you soon. Please be strong. It's only a matter of time until this nightmare ends. So
yeah, the only thing to say there is, like, you have to just acknowledge it's written in captivity. So
of course, yeah,
you can't be sure that's
under
like
duress.
100%. Yeah, you can't be sure it's 100% like reflective of what he actually thinks. I mean,
right.
We have to apply the same standard, of course, whenever Israel puts out like a so-called confession video of someone,
of course,
in Israeli custody who's probably been tortured, and you just have to keep that in mind for any captive statement.
Yeah, of course. But it's interesting that what's interesting is that his parents have allowed for the release of that video, which indicates that perhaps they think that the things in there should be done. Maybe. I mean, I'm not saying that with certainty. It's certainly a possibility, though. And of course, I'm about to sneeze. Sorry. No. Excuse me. And of course, there's many things that Biden could have done and Netanyahu could have done, and still could do to get these the captives out. But they don't care about them.
Well, let's see what the guy who's supposedly in charge of national security, Jake Sullivan, has to say about all this. Starting with a brand new development, as if there isn't enough going on in the world. You have ongoing genocide in Gaza. Lebanon is in ruins after many weeks of Israeli bombardment, and actually Israel's still attacking parts of Lebanon, even though there's been a ceasefire. On top of all that, plus again the whole proxy war in Ukraine thing, rival nuclear powers on opposing sides. Then you have now in Syria militants with a group that is basically Al Qaeda under a different name. It's led by the founding leader of Al Qaeda in Syria, who's also a former deputy to the founding leader of ISIS. His name is Jolani. They launched an offensive inside Syria and have taken over large parts of Aleppo and are threatening other areas on top of everything else that's going on in the world. So you have an Al Qaeda offshoot taking territory inside Syria now. And what does Jake Sullivan have to say about this new development? Well, he makes some interesting admissions. So here he is speaking to CNN.
This weekend, we saw Syrian rebels launch an offensive in the city.
The first thing to point out here is, and you'll see this made across the spectrum, media spectrum, inside Syria, if the militants are fighting the government, they're called rebels. None of these people would ever call Hamas, which is fighting a military occupation, rebels. They're either terrorists or they're militants or they're extremists. Inside Syria, where the rebels here, quote unquote, in question, are literally an offshoot of Al Qaeda. They're never called, or they're seldom called Al Qaeda, and they're always called rebels. So that's the first thing to note. And why is that? Is because the U.S., under people like Jake Sullivan, starting in 2011, spent billions of dollars via the CIA arming these so-called rebels. And the U.S. did this despite knowing that the insurgency was dominated by groups like Al Qaeda. But yet, because they're on the side of the U.S., they get called rebels.
Right. Yeah, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter.
Strategic city, and this is the first time that they've taken control of it since it fell to government forces almost a decade ago now. Were you surprised was the U.S. government surprised by how swiftly these rebels took over?
Let me tell you one thing we weren't surprised by. We were not surprised that these rebels would try to take advantage of a new situation in which the Syrian government's main backers, Iran, Russia, and Hezbollah, were all distracted and weakened by conflicts and events elsewhere.
By the way, just one thing, we are going to see what you say, Aaron, is true. They are portrayed as rebels. But this time you're going to see a little bit of flirtation with the idea that maybe there's some terrorism thrown in there. And I suspect that's because it's going to be on display. And so the U.S. wants to get ahead of that.
Well, what he just said is a really important admission. So he said that he's not surprised that the rebels have taken advantage of Syria's allies being distracted elsewhere. And who does he mention? Iran, Russia, and Hezbollah. And why are Syria's allies distracted? Well, because they're bogged down in conflicts that the U.S. is fueling. Right. So Russia is distracted, obviously, with the proxy war in Ukraine. And Iran and Hezbollah have been distracted by their conflicts with Israel, particularly in Lebanon and also in Gaza. And who is playing an instrumental role in distracting all these other allies of Syria? It's the U.S., because they've given Ukraine and Israel tens of billions of dollars in weapons to fight the allies of Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah. And in the case of Hezbollah directly. So Jake Sullivan is inadvertently admitting that Al Qaeda was able to advance in Syria because Syria's allies were distracted by the U.S. being involved in conflicts against them elsewhere.
Right.
So he's taking credit. He's taking credit without openly taking credit, basically.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's like not to brag, but we did help destabilize this region and cause this.
So the Syrian rebels took a look at that. They took a look at three actors who had been pummeling them for years: Iran, Russia, Hezbollah. They had seen them weaker and more exposed than before, and they tried to take advantage of it. Now the speed.
Great job, Jake. Great job. So you're acknowledging that Al Qaeda took advantage of Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah being weaker because of you. So Jake Sullivan was basically bragging that he helped create an opportunity for Al Qaeda to exploit.
Right.
This offensive, I think, very much surprised the Syrian government and other observers in the region. But the fact that we've seen activity in Syria coming off of all the other things we've seen in the Middle East and Ukraine and elsewhere, that is something that is the natural result of those adversaries ending up in a weaker strategic position.
And putting them in a weaker strategic position is exactly your goal. Recall that the U.S. goal in Ukraine is to weaken Russia. And Jake Sullivan has even said it's to hand Russia a strategic defeat. So Jake Sullivan, just to really put a fine point on this, he's taking credit for Al-Qaeda exploiting the weaker position of Syria's allies that his government helped cause.
Right. Yeah.
But-
I mean, it's useful. It's useful for us, for critics who point this out. But there's a great piece of evidence.
It's certainly useful for the podcast Useful Idiots. That's correct.
That's true. Yeah.
And but it's a little awkward because who are these quote unquote rebels?
Right.
Well, they are an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. Again, the founder of the leader of the rebels. I'm just using the term on corporate news. I'm not endorsing the term.
Right.
Is a guy named Jolani, who literally he's the founding leader of Al-Qaeda in Syria, and is the former deputy to the founding caliph of ISIS, Baghdadi. Okay, that's who's leading the rebels. And yes, he's trimmed his beard and he
Right.
wears a suit now.
Yeah.
And so that's why he's being, that's why in the media, you'll hear him, they'll talk about how his group, and they changed their name. They were called
They've
Nusra.
rebranded.
Yeah, they were called Nusra, and then they've gone through a number of name changes. Now they're called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and so they're called HTS. But fundamentally, their members are all from an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. Some of their members are even former members of ISIS. And in fact, when the last two ISIS leaders have been killed in U.S. operations inside Idlib, which is the territory in Syria that Al-Qaeda controls, they were living inside Idlib, this stronghold controlled by Jolani, who's the head of HTS. So, I mean, this idea that somehow because they changed their name, they're no longer Al-Qaeda, it's undermined by basically all the available facts. And just because you change your name, it doesn't mean you're any different. And Jake Sullivan's going to basically tacitly agree to that. It's tacitly admit that now, because it's a little awkward to be supporting an Al-Qaeda dominated insurgency.
Right. We could kind of describe what's happened to Jelani as terrorist makeover. You could do a reality TV show called Terrorist Makeover, or what is it? Well, I don't know what the queer eye for the straight guy would be, but imperialist eye for the terrorist guy. Just a couple options.
What does it mean for U.S. forces in the region, for U.S. assets? Is there a greater risk?
At the moment, we believe that our forces who are stationed in Syria to fight ISIS are not at proximate risk because they are in a different part of the country from where this particular...
That's another lie. As I've written about, U.S. forces are not fighting ISIS. They actually barely fight ISIS. What they're doing is, as Donald Trump admitted, is they're there to steal Syria's oil. And they're also they also happen to occupy a region that contains, Syria's wheat reserves. So basically, by being in that region, they're stealing Syria's oil and wheat. Why? Just to keep Syria poor and divided, because Syria, according to the people like Jake Sullivan and Donald Trump, needs to be punished because Syria resisted the U.S. in a decade-long dirty war in which the U.S. funded and armed an Al-Qaeda-dominated insurgency. So essentially, for revenge, the U.S. is stealing Syria's resources, and that's what U.S. troops are doing, and that's why they're in harm's way, because the U.S. is more committed to stealing Syria's resources and keeping it poor than it is to actually fighting ISIS and having peace in the region.
Right.
Offensive is taking place, but they are under a different kind of threat. They are still under a threat from Iran and the Shia-backed militia groups in Iraq and Syria. And every single day, we work to ensure that they are protected and that we respond to attacks against them, as we have just done in the last.
Rather than just withdraw them, no one voted for having U.S. troops in Syria. There's no congressional authorization for having U.S. troops in Syria. It's all done under the war on terror legislation from 20 years ago. But rather than withdraw them, and that would really keep them safe, the U.S. puts them in harm's way.
Right.
Last week.
So do you think what the rebels have done here in Aleppo advances U.S. strategic interests at this point?
Well, this is a very good question, Casey. It's a complicated question because the group...
It's complicated. Sure, they're Al-Qaeda, right? Okay, but let's hear the other side of this. from Jake Sullivan, who's supposed to be the guy in charge of national security. It's nuanced. Yes, they're Al Qaeda, but hey, let's look at the other side and let's let Jake make the case.
But the vanguard of this rebel advance, HTS, is actually a terrorist organization designated by the United States. So we have real concerns about the designs and objectives of that organization. At the same time, of course, we don't.
Notice how he just called them HTS, some like benign acronym, not Al Qaeda, which is again where they come from. They're led by Abu Muhammad al-Jilani, who again, he's the founding leader of Al Qaeda in Syria and a former deputy to the founding caliph of ISIS, Baghdadi. And when you're covering this in media, I mean, if we still care about Al Qaeda, the group that attacked the U.S. on 9/11, that's important information. And Jake Sullivan has omitted it, and so has CNN. And so have actually many other places, unfortunately. It's not just corporate media.
And by the way, I have to point out that Jelani, if you look at him, he does have sociopath eyes.
Much like Jake Sullivan.
Yes, true.
Yeah.
No wonder he likes him.
Cry over the fact that the Assad government, backed by Russia.
Well, let's go back a little bit, because this really shows just how committed the U.S. is to security and fighting terrorism.
The fact that the Assad government designs and objectives of that organization. At the same time, of course, we don't cry over the fact that the Assad government, backed by Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah, are facing certain kinds of pressure. So it's a complicated situation. It's one we're monitoring closely, and we're staying in close touch with regional partners about it.
It's complicated. On the one hand, yeah, sure, they're a terrorist group, but in fact, they're actually Al Qaeda, which Jake doesn't mention. On the other hand, we're not going to cry over Syria losing territory. And why is that? Because we tried to overthrow the Syrian government for a decade. It was under Jake Sullivan's first administration, the Obama administration, that Obama authorized one of the most expensive covert wars in history. The CIA and its allies, Israel, Turkey, the Gulf monarchies, the UK, France, spending tens of billions of dollars to arm an Al Qaeda dominated insurgency. And now that Al Qaeda has taken more territory, Jake Sullivan says, we're not going to cry over that. And just to make it really explicit, Jake Sullivan didn't mention that HTS is really Al Qaeda in that clip, but he knows exactly who they are because he's written about them before. So let's show this email. If you haven't seen this before, this really says it all. This is from February 2012, and it's an email from Jake Sullivan to his then boss, Hillary Clinton. And it says this: see last item, Al Qaeda is on our side in Syria. So that is Jake Sullivan from 2012. Now it's 2024, and Jake Sullivan won't say it publicly, but the group leading the advances for the rebels, quote unquote, is Al Qaeda. And what he's basically saying in that clip is, yeah, we know that they're on our terrorist list, but at the same time, we're not going to cry over their gain. So therefore, Jake Sullivan is basically saying Al Qaeda is still on our side in Syria.
Right. Friends forever.
Friends forever. Yep. Okay. Well, on top of.
By the way, where are we on likes? Because we watched a lot of painful stuff this week. What do we got on likes? Let's see. I really like to not take out time to do this, but guys, let's see. What do we got? We are at, oh my God, we are at 713. We're not even a third. Guys, we're not even a third of the way. I want to see some likes. Let's get some likes up. We're at 772. I mean, I'm going to be very generous. I should demand that we get to 1,000, but I'll settle for 900. We're at 850 now. We just need 50 more of you. Useful. Oh, great. Great. 937. Can we get to 1,000? Can I get 1,000? All right. All right. Oh, 995. 995. Can I get 1,000? Can I get 5 more? 5 more. I believe we can do it. Yay. Thank you, guys. Great Patriots. Okay. Let's keep going, Aaron.
All right. So meanwhile, of course, just days after Biden touts a ceasefire agreement in Lebanon, there's still the genocide going on in Gaza. And what does Jake Sullivan have to say about that? Well, he spoke to Face the Nation.
I'm sure you saw over the last couple of days the video from Gaza of Palestinians surging to try to get a loaf of bread, in some cases crushing one another unintentionally. All suggestions are that the humanitarian situation there is, if it already isn't past crisis stage, near famine crisis stage. How much does that intensify the need to get this thing across, as you just said, the finish line?
The humanitarian situation in Gaza is a crisis. You have too many people who are suffering from shortages of food, water, medicine, access to sanitation, innocent people who deserve a measure of peace and deserve access to all.
Notice how they always do this, like too many people are dying, there are too many people suffering this, there are too many people suffering that. Notice what's missing from there is why, who's doing it.
And also this strange language of it's too many people who are dying, right? As if there's an acceptable number of people dying. They'll never say too many Israelis died on October 7th.
Right.
But they'll always say too many Palestinians have suffered, which suggests that there's an acceptable number of Palestinians who can suffer and die. It's just too many. And then, of course, as you say, what are we doing about it? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So we're just passive bystanders, according to Jake Sullivan, when really the U.S. is playing the instrumental role in keeping the genocide going by arming Israel and by refusing to even carry out the limited steps that the U.S. threatens it will take. So, for example, recently, Antony Blinken and Lloyd Austin sent Israel that letter before the election and said, you have 30 days. Okay, you have 30 days to ease the starvation siege of Gaza and let in more supplies. Israel did nothing. In fact, things got worse. And what happened? The U.S. did nothing because they're enablers of this genocide. So it's just deceit. And it's also the language used is so fundamentally dehumanizing and racist. You would never say about Israel, too many Israelis have suffered, too many Israelis have died.
Yeah, and also, I mean, obviously they're not going to indict themselves or talk about their own role in this, but they won't even talk about Israel's role. They always do these things where they make it seem like policy decisions are almost like natural disasters.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right.
All of those life-saving supplies in abundance. The United States has been working week in, week out, month in, month out, to open crossings, to move trucks, to ensure that humanitarian aid gets in. And at critical moments, we have been able to intervene in ways that have staved off the worst case scenarios of famine. But it's...
Great job, Jake. You've staved off the worst case scenarios of famine. Well, meanwhile, in northern Gaza, hundreds of thousands of people have been trapped with nothing. People are sleeping in tents that are freezing and that, are vulnerable to rainwater and all these other nightmares, bugs. It's a death camp of 2 million people. And he's bragging that we staved off the worst case scenario of famine.
Yeah, that's amazing. Absolutely amazing. I mean, that's their like humble brag.
Constantly stalking Gaza. And so more needs to be done to get aid in. Now, part of the problem, as we've seen just in the last 24 hours, is not actually moving aid from outside Gaza into Gaza, but moving it around Gaza once it's inside. The UN...
Well, actually, a big problem is moving aid into Gaza because Israel blocks so many trucks from getting in. Talk to any aid group and they'll say, we're not getting in anywhere near the levels that we need. And, often trucks will go in and Israel will just take out goods that it doesn't deem appropriate for whatever reason. It will ban anything it wants if Israel can say, oh, this can be used for terrorism or something like that, including in the past, things like chocolate or pasta. It's like, it's just
cinnamon, I believe.
Yes. And then you have the fact that, once you get the aid inside Gaza, there are, gangs that have been looting trucks and taking goods, but there's been reporting on this that actually this is done with Israel's permission, essentially.
Yeah.
Israel sits by and watches as the trucks get looted because they want to fuel chaos. It's it's a concentration camp strategy.
Yeah, right. Haaretz article says the IDF is allowing armed Palestinians to shoot aid convoys entering Gaza and to extort protection money from them. Say sources in international aid organizations working in the enclave. Which again, the IDF does not, as people may have noticed, does not show a lot of self-restraint. And like, it looks like the only Palestinians they don't shoot at are the ones who are actually wreaking havoc here.
In fact, said it was suspending movement from certain areas of Gaza because of concerns about looting. These are all things that would be helped if there were a ceasefire in place.
If only we could get a ceasefire in place. Ugh. Yeah, we're just wringing our hands here. The administration that is repeatedly covered up for Israel as Israel changes its demands to ensure that there's no ceasefire deal is now, just waving its hands and saying, why can't we get a ceasefire in place? It's so difficult. It's so difficult. Okay. More Jake Sullivan. Actually being asked a pretty good question about, okay, well, so you say that this is so horrible, we need a ceasefire. Why are you not using your leverage on Israel
that we have left in office?
Jake, I want to have a conversation with you about leverage as regards the Israeli government. I want to play for you something that Maryland Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen said on this program a week ago. Let's listen.
We've seen this pattern where President Biden makes demands of Prime Minister Netanyahu only to be ignored or slapped down entirely. And then President Biden sends more bombs and more money. Mm-hmm. That is not an effective use of leverage.
Your response?
First of all, I respect Senator Van Hollen. He knows these issues as well as any person in Washington, and he is passionate about them. But of course, we have a different perspective. We have at various points over the course of this conflict made asks of the Israelis consistent with our values and our interests. Have we gotten
like what?
Everything we've asked for? No. Have we seen a change in Israeli behavior with respect to the movement of humanitarian assistance, with respect to how?
No, we haven't seen a change. No. Maybe at times they've let in a token amount of trucks, when the the U.S. was forced to say something because of the scale of the crisis. But have you stemmed at all a starvation siege of Gaza? No, you have not. You've enabled it. So he's living in a complete. It's so awful because, again, this is not like a normal war situation where you have two sides fighting and it's complicated. Gaza is a death camp. It's a besieged death camp. Hamas, the Palestinians there don't have air defenses. They don't have tanks. They don't really have anything to defend themselves. It's just and they have nowhere to go. They're trapped. And Jake Sullivan is pretending as if somehow the U.S. has gotten Israel to improve the conditions in its starvation siege, when Israeli leaders have openly said, we are going to, displace people and cut off food, fuel, and water. So it's just a complete lie. And it needs to be challenged more on this. It's good to be asked these questions, but asking him a question is not enough. You have to, everything he's saying is a malicious lie. And so everything he says basically should be challenged if we were doing journalism on corporate TV, which of course we're not.
Yeah. And also, well, let's play this because as you just pointed out, Aaron, the Israeli government announces its war crimes in many cases. Let me just rewind this a little bit because this is kind of a damning thing that he's saying.
We have a different perspective. We have at various points over the course of this conflict made asks of the Israelis consistent with our values and our interests. Have we gotten everything we've asked for? No. Have we seen a change in Israeli behavior with respect to the movement of humanitarian assistance, with respect to how they conducted certain military operations, including in places like Rafah? Yes, we have. And so we do believe that we've had a constructive engagement with the Israeli government and also been able to make a difference on the ground with respect to the flow of humanitarian aid. In addition, we worked closely with the Israeli government to bring about a ceasefire in Lebanon, a ceasefire people said wasn't possible until a new administration took office.
Who said that, by the way?
Yeah.
Our whole point has been you could impose a ceasefire simply by using your leverage on Israel and stopping to enable it in committing atrocities. So what is he? He's like, they said it couldn't be done. They all doubted us. No one thought we could do it. When really,
maybe we said it wouldn't be done.
everyone's been begging you. I mean, everyone like with a conscience has been begging
Yeah.
you for a ceasefire for a year, and he's like,
And
they
pointing
said
out
we
you could
couldn't
do
do
it
it.
with one phone call.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They doubted us.
Yeah.
They doubted
The
our will.
haters. Yeah.
But again, it's like even this language, like have we gotten everything we've asked for
Right.
from Israel? No, it's not like a conversation. If you're the critical accomplice to a criminal, it's not as if you can sit there and have like some nice healthy dialogue and make some
Right.
polite requests. You demand stuff. If there's
Yeah.
Israeli leaders saying we're going to have a starvation siege of Gaza, what you can say is, don't do it. We're not going to support you and stop it right now. It's not like, oh, hey, can you please give us this and let's have a conversation. And then he's bragging about Rafah, like we had an impact on Rafah. Rafah was where Biden said that if Israel invades Rafah, that's a red line. What did Israel do? It invaded Rafah. So what is he talking about that like the U.S. has gotten its demands met? Israel knowingly crossed Biden's only self-declared red line, and he's bragging about what the U.S. accomplished in getting Israel to bow to U.S. He's bragging about what the U.S. Accomplished in getting Israel to bow to the Biden administration's request. It's just a fantasy land.
And also, like you pointed out, Aaron, they're talking about this like it's a to and fro, a back and forth, like they're like in couples therapy or something, as opposed to being in control of Israel's policies. We know with one phone call they could control this, they could cut off this genocide. But even by admitting that they haven't gotten everything they've asked for, and what they're asking for is for Israel to comply with international law, they are admitting that Israel is committing war crimes. Like you can't pick and choose. Remember, they made those demands, and they said that Israel, for the 17 million times they said they were going to have face some consequences, and they faced no consequences because they achieved some of the demands that the U.S. was making. It's not like a buffet. You're either like violating international law or you're not. And also, the Section 6201 requires that the U.S. government suspend military assistance to any government that in any way restricts delivery of aid covered in the statute. The final element related to humanitarian assistance covers any instance where the government in question does not fully cooperate with the U.S. and U.S.-supported international humanitarian aid efforts. So there he is, just admitting out loud in this interview that they are not acting in accordance to the law. He's just admitted that they're committing war crimes with our support.
Yeah, and what has the Biden administration done when its own experts from the U.S. government have told it that Israel is blocking aid? They've doctored the reports. Anthony Blinken was told by his own experts in the U.S. government that Israel is blocking aid. They're in violation of the law. And he went before Congress and told them a different story. He lied, basically. And what has the rest of the world said about all this? Well, the International Criminal Court just indicted Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. And one of the main charges against them is that they've imposed a starvation siege inside Gaza, which also could be used to question Jake Sullivan, which, of course, it wasn't here. But they're being indicted for blocking humanitarian aid, and Jake Sullivan wants to brag about the U.S. role in Israel's delivery of aid. So he's basically admitting that he's also guilty of an action that the ICC says is a war crime.
Right. Yeah. Disgusting.
Jake, I want to turn your attention to Ukraine.
All right. Well, that is Jake Sullivan bragging about the U.S. role in Gaza, which again, to me, is like evidence that could be used to bring a war crimes case against Jake Sullivan and his colleagues. But there's also Ukraine.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, and there's also Ukraine. That whole disaster, where the U.S. recently gave Ukraine permission to launch long-range strikes into Russia, and the U.S. is also telling Ukraine, hey, we don't really have that many weapons left to give you. What you should do is, though, lower your conscription age to send more younger people off to die. And here's Jake Sullivan talking about Ukraine and what they plan to do before Biden leaves office.
What are you telling your Ukrainian counterparts about American support in 51 days after Biden leaves office?
Well, first, what I'm saying is we are going to do everything in our power for these 50 days to get Ukraine all the tools we possibly can to strengthen their position on the battlefield so that they'll be stronger at the negotiating table. And President Biden directed me to oversee a massive surge in the military equipment that we are delivering to Ukraine so that we have spent every dollar that Congress has appropriated to us by the time that President Biden leaves office. So that's first and foremost what we're focused on. And then I've encouraged the Ukrainian team to engage the incoming team as well as to engage all of our allies and partners because, again, on January 21st, the war in Ukraine doesn't just go away. Obviously, the new team will have its own policy, its own approach, and I can't speak to that. But what I can do is make sure that we put Ukraine in the best possible position when we hand off the baton.
Well, great job, Jake. Your strategy so far of flooding Ukraine with weapons, spending tens of billions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer money, it's resulted in Ukraine losing about 20% of its territory, hundreds of thousands dead. And by the way, and this wasn't mentioned in this clip, what is Biden doing on his way out? He's not just pushing all the weapons he can into Ukraine before he leaves. He's just asked Congress for another $24 billion. So already about $182 billion has been appropriated. Now Biden, with less than 2 months left, has asked Congress, hey, can I get another $24 billion?
Yeah, while you're on your way out, while
for
I'm
the
on
Ukraine
my way
proxy
out.
war. So that is the grand Biden strategy inside of Ukraine.
Yeah, and as we were saying, we talked about this a lot on last week's episode. Support for this war is at an all-time low. You have people, press gangs kidnapping people, as you just mentioned, Aaron, and 52% of Ukrainians want a negotiated end to this war.
Don't listen to Ukrainians. That is the new
Right.
motto inside Washington.
Right.
Don't listen to Ukrainians if they want to negotiate peace. And again, we've talked about this a million times. We have to we have to stress it because this fact is still banned elsewhere in most media, including progressive media, unfortunately. But there was a peace deal in the spring of 2022 negotiated between Russia and Ukraine. We all know now what happened. The UK and US stepped in and said to Ukraine, we're not going to back you up if you make this deal, and you should keep fighting Russia because guess what? They're weak and we should take advantage of that. And so now we're in the situation where hundreds of thousands are dead. Ukraine loses more territory, and the US is assisting in these long-range strikes into Russia. So what could go wrong? But some good news, in this same interview.
And you can catch Aaron debating Simon Schuster on that on last week's episode.
Yeah, we didn't set it up as a debate. It was just a discussion. But Simon Schuster is a journalist who has done a lot of really important reporting inside Ukraine. He was inside the Zelensky's office and bunker basically throughout much of the invasion. So has really important access to top Ukrainian officials. And so he was on our show last week, and we had I think a really good exchange about the causes of the war and how it could be resolved. And obviously, Simon has a different point of view than I do, but he's put the reporting first, and he's done some very important work that gives us a sense of the reality inside of Ukraine. So that's an interesting discussion that you can watch more of. One good thing, though, that I think is positive for everybody who doesn't want nuclear Armageddon, Jake Sullivan was asked on the Sunday news shows whether it's true that the U.S. is considering putting nuclear weapons inside Ukraine, because that was reported recently by the New York Times. And Jake Sullivan did say no, we're not. So that's not true. So, hey, good news, everybody. Yes, we're fueling the proxy war, but no nukes in Ukraine for now. And that's positive news.
Right.
Okay, let's turn to Senator Mike Rounds. He's a Republican.
Oh, yeah. He's making the rounds.
He's making the rounds. He's promoting rounds of ammunition.
Yep.
Because he likes proxy wars, including in Ukraine. What does he have to say about Ukraine and the plans of incoming President Donald Trump?
All right, turning to Ukraine, you made some interesting comments recently, casting doubts about the possibility of peace talks between Ukraine and Vladimir Putin, any kind of an agreement that would involve giving up territory in exchange for peace. Let's take a listen to what you said.
It's time to take a hard look at this thing and really ask ourselves, do you believe that this tyrant, if you offer him a part of a free country, do you think he's going to stop? As much as I would love to say that there is a path towards a peaceful resolution to this by negotiating with this tyrant, I suspect that we may be deceiving ourselves.
But this is exactly what Trump's trying to do, right? He's named an envoy for these peace talks, which obviously haven't started and haven't been committed to by either side yet. But the framework appears to be exactly what you just said is problematic, which is Ukraine giving to Russia territory that it has taken by force in exchange for peace.
I don't think that we should deceive ourselves. I think Mr. Putin is a tyrant. I think dealing with him is going to be extremely difficult. I give President Trump credit for saying that he wants to end this. He wants to end the bloodshed. He doesn't like the suffering that's out there. I just think this is going to be an enormous task for anybody to negotiate with Putin. Look, I don't think this guy is interested in stopping anywhere that he's at right now. I think we have to recognize that. So I think the president's got a huge job on his hands if we're going to be successful in stopping Putin. I think wherever we look, Mr. Putin is going to do his best to find a weakness. If he finds a weakness within NATO, he's going to try to utilize that to his advantage.
What he's describing is the U.S. strategy inside Ukraine, because again, what is the open goal of the U.S.? As Lloyd Austin said, it's to weaken Russia. Russia, by contrast, their position was, before Russia invaded, their position was, hey, if Ukraine just respects the Minsk Accords, which would call for granting, autonomy to the ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine, millions of them, then we can have peace. And also, if you pledge to keep Ukraine neutral, not join NATO. That was Russia's main demand before the war. And after the war, they negotiated another agreement in Istanbul. And the basic premise there was that, again, Ukraine would declare neutrality. And the status of Donbass, these eastern Ukrainian areas where there are millions of ethnic Russians, that would be the subject of direct talks between Putin and Zelensky. But the main goal for Russia was neutrality for Ukraine, which is not a radical demand if you look at Ukraine's founding declaration of state sovereignty, which called on Ukraine to be a neutral state. And that was, by the way, also the position of Yanukovych, the Ukrainian president who was overthrown with U.S. support back in February 2014, which set off this entire crisis. So that's actually Russia's actual position. And Mike Rounds omits that. Maybe he's not even aware of it. And certainly he'll never be asked about it by ABC News or any other corporate network.
But he does call him a tyrant whenever he can. Call Putin a tyrant.
Yes, he does. And you know what? We really should play. I'm sorry I didn't prepare this. So this is a little on the fly. Boris Johnson, our favorite, Boris Johnson recently admitted that this is a proxy war. Remember when we were attacked, Katie, for calling this a proxy war? And that was called Russian propaganda, blah, 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 blah. We'll listen to our friend, Boris Johnson, put it in his own words. And again, Boris Johnson is the recently departed British prime minister who went to Zelensky after Ukraine reached that peace deal with Russia in the spring of 2022 and told Zelensky on behalf of the U.S., we're not going to back you up, and you should keep fighting Russia because guess what? Putin's weak.
Yeah.
We are, let's face it, we're waging a proxy war. We're waging a proxy war, but we're not giving our proxies the ability to do the job. And for years and years now, we've been allowing them to fight with one hand tied behind their backs, and it has been cruel. It has been cruel, and we need now to give them what they need. So we are, let's face it, we're waging a proxy war.
We have to hear it one more time. Let's face it, we are waging a proxy war. Yes, we are, Boris, and thank you for admitting it. And I hope everyone who melted down every time we called it a proxy war can listen to if they don't believe it from us, listen to Boris Johnson. It's so funny when we would call it a proxy war.
He's a Putin puppet, Aaron.
Yeah. Like when we would say it, the line is, "You're denying Ukrainians their agency," right? So here's Boris Johnson saying it. So who's the one denying Ukrainians their agency by admitting that that the government is being used as a proxy of the West? It's just so sad. It's so sad. Okay, well, we're running out of time.
Should we get to the pardon?
we spent so much time on Jake Sullivan. No, well, we should do a little bit on Kash Patel, who Trump has nominated to be the director of the FBI. Let's turn to Jamie Raskin. Jamie Raskin, the Democratic Congress member from Maryland, clip number 7. He was asked about Kash Patel being tapped to head the FBI.
Start with your reaction to the news out of Mar-a-Lago overnight that Donald Trump intends to nominate Kash Patel to be the FBI director, which of course implies that he's going to fire the sitting FBI director, Christopher Wray. What is your reaction? What are the implications?
Well, Christopher Wray, of course, is a Republican, appointed by a Republican, as he has said, but apparently has demonstrated too much independence and objectivity in the job for Donald Trump, who wants much more of a personal loyalist in the position, and that's why he's gone to Kash Patel.
Do you think there are any issues inside the FBI around politicization, as many who voted for Donald Trump seem to say?
Well, undoubtedly, if you look at it historically, for example, during the COINTELPRO period, the FBI really was weaponized against Dr. King and the civil rights movement and the peace movement. There was, decades of the FBI being basically used as a political instrument. There's an interesting book about that, about J. Edgar Hoover by Beverly Gage, that people can look at. I mean, and so I haven't seen what the proof is that the FBI has been weaponized against a political party or the Department of Justice, of course.
Oh, sorry. Here's the proof, Jamie, in case you forgot about it. I'm surprised he forgets because he was a major pusher of it. They framed Trump as a Russian agent. Okay. I know it's uncomfortable for people to remember now because it took up so much time. Remember, it was all the media talked about. It was the Russia investigation, Robert Mueller. The FBI took part in framing Trump as a conspirator with Russia. They relied on the Steele dossier, which is a collection of conspiracy theories funded by the Clinton campaign, to pursue their investigation of Trump as a Russian conspirator and to rely on it for surveillance warrants against people like Carter Page, who was part of the Trump campaign. It's embarrassing now to admit it because everybody fell for it, so like, I'm sorry to say I told you so, but it happened. And Trump and his fans don't forget that. Right. And so if you are going to still insist that there's no evidence that the DOJ was weaponized against Trump and his movement, you got to reckon with the fact that he was falsely accused of conspiring with Russia, and that investigation consumed the first 2 years of his presidency and actually did major damage to, I think, geopolitics because it made diplomacy with Russia pretty much impossible. And then you have other cases. The FBI in 2020, before the election, they knew that Hunter Biden's laptop was not a Russian disinformation operation, but yet they suppressed that news when a bunch of intelligence officials came forward and said that this was a Russian operation. And the FBI even conducted these exercises with like Twitter and Facebook right before the laptop came out, basically saying that, like, look, in the election, you might have this thing where damaging information about Hunter Biden comes out. And if that's the case, it probably will be the work of Russia. So the FBI was involved in pushing another Russia Trump scam, which is that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation. And then you have all these cases against Trump since he left office. Some of them I think have merit, but when you have it reported, as it was in the New York Times, that Joe Biden was saying behind the scenes that Merrick Garland should be prosecuting Donald Trump, that's going to raise suspicions that yes, the DOJ is being weaponized against a political opponent.
Right.
And so I'm sorry, everyone complaining about Kash Patel and Trump, they have to look at their own role in giving ammunition to the belief inside the Trump movement that the government's being used against them. And there's a long list, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, and it is, Jamie Raskin should be acknowledged, at least for admitting, although it's easy to admit it when you're talking about the past, but how disgusting the FBI has been historically, which the Republicans don't want to talk about. But as you pointed out, the Democrats don't want to point about how politicized it is now.
Yes, and of course, if the DOJ hadn't been weaponized against Trump, would Trump care about the DOJ going after? No, of course not. Obviously, but the fact is, he was targeted by it. So was his campaign. Again, it's not like a laughing matter to be framed as a Russian asset. It's pretty serious. and it was a big deal when it was happening. And Kash Patel, his nomination, is the direct result of that, because Kash Patel, when he was on the House Intelligence Committee, he played a critical role in unearthing the FBI's surveillance abuses in carrying out the Russia investigation. And at the time, if you remember, he and Devin Nunes, who he was working for, were attacked for that, when everything they said basically turned out to be right. And him being nominated is a direct result of the FBI being used to push the scam investigation into Trump's fictional ties to Russia. So there has to be, if people want to learn anything from this, there has to be a reckoning with that fact.
Yes. And something that I don't think either party wants to acknowledge either is that the FBI is investigating things like the violence outside LA synagogue, which was, of course, a not violence. It was a pro-Palestinian protest against selling off Palestinian property. So this is another example of the FBI doing things that really should not be within the purview of the FBI. But something tells me both parties like that.
I guarantee both parties will fully be behind that because they only care about weaponization if it's going out, if it's against them, not against actually people protesting a genocide. So yes, that's a place where both parties will be in total lockstep.
So disgusting.
Okay, well,
we got time for, like, should we do one more clip, or do we just? I feel like we should. Shouldn't we show the pardon clip?
Yeah. Okay. Well,
breaking news.
So this broke after the Sunday morning news shows, but Joe Biden went ahead and did something unthinkable. He lied. He lied to the public. He repeatedly said he would never pardon his son, Hunter Biden. And guess what? He broke that promise, and he just pardoned Hunter Biden. And Biden supporters on MSNBC feel betrayed by their leader. And so this is former Congressmember Joe Walsh speaking to MSNBC.
What do you make of all of this? What is likely to be the response on Capitol Hill to this breaking news?
Good to be with you. See, I told you so. They're all like that. So the next time any of us complain about anything Trump does, this pardon is just deflating. For those of us who have been out there for a few years now yelling about what a unique threat Donald Trump is, for Joe Biden to do something like this, Trump, nobody's above the law, we've been screaming. Well, Joe Biden just made clear his son Hunter is above the law.
And by the way, Joe Walsh is one of these never Trumpers who has really kind of, this is like many Republicans, this is his grift. He's obviously very angry, but he also famously, some people may remember him as saying to Obama, "You lie," putting out a video calling Obama a liar. I do want to just mention that he also is a liar and is on the hook for child support. Okay, back to the video.
Donald Trump lies every time he opens his mouth, we've been screaming. Joe Biden repeatedly lied about this. The politicization of the justice system. Donald Trump and his people have been screaming. Well, that's exactly what Biden said here.
Joe, is this a politics of purity? I mean, we had Donald Trump pardon Sheriff Joe Arpaio during his term, and there wasn't a lot of hue and cry about that. I mean, this is a
There was from like the left, from people who care about Arpaio being a sadistic, xenophobic racist who makes his prisoners work in labor law violating conditions and makes them wear pink to humiliate them. But maybe this woman and her colleagues didn't care.
Yeah, he also pardoned. Trump also I mean, it is worth pointing out that Trump also pardoned. I think a better example than Joe Arpaio is he pardoned his son's, his daughter's father-in-law, Charles Kushner, for filing false tax returns and other crimes. And now, by the way, he's also just made Charles Kushner his ambassador to France.
Beautiful.
So, I mean, it is fair to say that Trump has done the exact same thing, except I don't think Trump ever said he would never pardon Charles Kushner. That's the difference with with Biden.
Exactly. Right. That's what I always say is Trump's hypocrisy isn't hypocritical. His opponent's hypocrisy is hypocritical, and that's what always gives him a leg up in all of this.
Yeah. Now, I want to be fair though. I didn't look too closely at Hunter Biden's case, but I do think if he were not the president's son, and if the DOJ was not trying to recover from accurate perceptions that it's biased, that Hunter Biden would have faced this federal case. It does sound like, I do think there's a case to be made that he was treated unfairly, and that there was a prosecution brought against him that wouldn't have been filed were he not the president's son, and prosecutors weren't trying to make up for the fact that the DOJ was involved in the Russiagate scam. So there is a case to be made that Hunter Biden was actually treated unfairly. But Joe Biden, who previously bragged about how he would lock up people with crack cocaine, and then he has a son who becomes a crack. There's so much hypocrisy for Joe Biden.
Oh yeah.
And also in this pardon, he doesn't just cover the crimes that Hunter Biden was convicted of. He also makes it retroactive. So it goes back to January 1st, 2014, which is strange. Why do you feel the need to pardon your son, not just for the crimes he was convicted of, but for anything else he might have done over a very long period of 10 years? And 2014 happens to be the year when Joe Biden was supportive of a coup in Ukraine that overthrew the government there. And then right after that, Hunter Biden got a very lucrative board seat on Burisma, a Ukrainian energy company. So there could be a connection there. I don't know. Maybe that's just a coincidence, but that part of this is interesting. But is there a case?
But Aaron, he wants to save. He wants to save time. He doesn't want to keep pardoning him. Getting him out of jail.
Yeah.
This is the most efficient way to do it.
But is there a case to be made that Hunter Biden was treated unfairly? I think actually, yes, there is. I'll say that. I'll say that in Hunter's defense. Yeah.
Also, I think that the answer to this, the response to this, shouldn't be "don't pardon Hunter" as much as pardon people, but don't be a hypocrite. So pardon people who actually deserve it, like pardon Leonard Peltier. But it is, it is fair to call him out for having promised not to pardon Hunter. And Joe Walsh makes an interesting point unintentionally. He kind of gives away part of the game, which he's like, we're saying that Trump is totally unprecedented and exceptional. And look at what happens. He's actually not that unprecedented and exceptional. Yeah.
Well, it's been the season of learning for Democrats who've been constantly railing, who called Trump Hitler and then realized that wasn't really working out as an electoral strategy. And now they learn that their guy, Joe Biden, is a lot like Trump himself.
Yeah. Let's finish playing that clip because there's another beautiful moment there.
Who saw his first wife killed, his daughter killed in a car crash, his two young sons survive. One goes on to have real death. There's a father who during his term, and there wasn't a lot of hue and cry about that. And this is a father who saw his first wife killed, his daughter killed in a car crash, his two young sons survive. One goes on to have real difficulties with addiction. Another dies because of cancer. This is a family that's really troubled. Yes, he said he wasn't going to do this, but did anyone ever believe that that was the case? I would have put good money on this happening.
Why did you expect Joe Biden to be telling the truth? She's really damning him with faint praise here. She's actually trying to defend Biden. And, it is sad what he went through and his family went through. But the thing that bothers me is he doesn't have any empathy for anyone else outside of his family, it looks like. Look at his crime bill legislation, which he, as he bragged, put anyone in jail for short of jaywalking, I think. Short of jaywalking or including jaywalking, I can't remember. But that's the real disgusting hypocrisy.
The anchor's like, if you would have offered me odds on Joe Biden lying, exactly. I would have taken that bet all day.
Yeah.
I would have thrown down.
Yeah. She's like, why are you so stupid? You idiot. Yeah.
Should we finish this out?
Sure, yeah.
People going to be surprised that a father who is also the president would do this for his son?
I don't know that people will be surprised because you're right. Joe Biden repeatedly said he wouldn't do this. So he repeatedly lied. But this just furthers the cynicism that people have about politics. And that cynicism strengthens Trump because Trump can just say, I'm not a unique threat. Everybody does this. If I do something for my kid, my son-in-law, whatever, look, Joe Biden does the same thing. I get it, but this was a selfish move by Biden, which politically only strengthens Trump. It's just deflating.
A selfish move. A selfish move by Biden, kind of like how Biden, should have dropped out way earlier, but he didn't.
Right.
And you can go down the list. Yeah, I mean, look, I'll tell you what makes me cynical about politicians when they lie. It's when they pretend to push for a ceasefire in Gaza while facilitating mass murder. That's what makes me angry, because I don't like
What
genocide.
do you make of?
But Joe Walsh, everyone's got different standards, and Joe Walsh is upset that Joe Biden lied about not pardoning his son Hunter. So we all have different things we care about. I think personally, facilitating a genocide and lying about the fact that you're not trying to stop it, I think that's a more serious offense. But hey, to each their own.
Yeah, and it would be nice if I'm glad that they have so much empathy for fathers who care about their children. Imagine if they had any of that empathy for fathers whose children are being killed in Palestine, or mothers whose children are being killed in Palestine, or children whose parents are being killed in Palestine.
Yeah, the co-founder of the Gaza soup kitchen was just assassinated in a Israeli drone strike. It was targeting him, and he leaves behind a number of kids and one more person wiped off the face of this earth by the Joe Biden armed Israeli military. And of course, these stories, there's so many of them to cover, but they don't get anywhere near the attention that they deserve, because the US media is basically cheering all this on. That to me, whatever else Joe Biden does, that will always to me be his biggest crime and his worst offense, and the thing really worth getting upset about. All right. Well, on that note, we're going to end the show.
Yeah.
Katie, anything you want to plug for this week?
Yes. I will be having on 2 great guests on my show tomorrow on the Katie Halper Show at 7 p.m. Asad Abu Khalil, who we've had on this show. He's a Lebanese American professor, really great analyst. And Amalia Shatella, who is being part of the Uhuru organization that's being prosecuted and persecuted right now. Speaking of the politicization of the Justice Department.
Yes. And did anybody in the Trump camp speak out for the Uhuru movement, who were framed as like Russian assets? And basically the government's case was that these like lifelong leftists, coming from the Black radical movement, that somehow their opposition to U.S. imperialism was the work of Russia, not their own views. Like, no one spoke out. I think Tucker Carlson did something about it.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, and Glenn
Greenwald. Yeah, but
yeah,
on like
but
aside from that, very little. Like in the Trump camp, so Tucker Carlson being the exception.
Right, in the Trump camp, right now.
Very little interest there, and the DOJ being weaponized.
Right.
Even though it's the same playbook as accusing an opponent of being a Russian asset, but
exactly.
Again,
but they're leftists, so they don't care.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, very cool. All right. Well,
I
website...
want to read one comment. A Syrian friend here. The whole war, falsely called uprising, was for the sake of Israel. Zionists grew fascist Islamist people in my country, then call people fleeing them as potential terrorists. Just want to elevate a particular Syrian voice in there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Syria is there's no issue that's more toxic on the pro-Palestine left than Syria. People have very strong views about it. A lot of people have suffered on the Syrian government, and want to see the government overthrown. And if you want to have your government overthrown, I mean, that's your business, right? Like, I'm not going to tell a Syrian who should be your ruler. But once you have the U.S., Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, France, the UK, Israel, arming one of the most powerful insurgencies in history, when it's dominated by Al-Qaeda, that's when I think it's appropriate for people in the West and everywhere else to voice their discomfort and to oppose that. And it's not an endorsement of the government itself. But unfortunately, you cannot. It's hard to have a sober discussion, inside the West about Syria, one that doesn't deny the corruption and brutality of the government, but that also doesn't accept the fact that we have the right to go and overthrow governments. Like, what business is it ours who rules Syria, especially when the goal is so obvious? It's to bleed a key ally of Hezbollah, because it's through Syria that Hezbollah in part gets its weaponry from Iran. And that's why the U.S. and Israel spent so much money trying to overthrow Syria and also just bleed Hezbollah to draw them in because they wanted to weaken a key part of the axis of resistance. And we're seeing the results of that now in this genocide. Right as Hezbollah is weakened in Lebanon, the al-Qaeda-led insurgency takes advantage. And if you care about Palestine, if you care about human rights, if you care about people's right to live in peace, these are all things I think to be concerned about.
Yes. So, and of course, if you care about people not being having to face an al-Qaeda-esque government, you may not want an overthrow either.
All right. Well, that's been our show. UsefulIdiotspodcast.com is our website. Please go there to support the show and get bonus content. Thanks for watching Monday Morning. We'll see you next time.
Bye.